All right, so the chart at the top of page 20 shows you the different things that could happen based on whether or not the null hypothesis is true and the decision that you make. So I've already filled in some of the information there. But for that first one, where it says correct decision, so that would be the null hypothesis is false. So kind of going to our trial, the defendant is guilty. Okay, they're not innocent, they're guilty. And we reject the null hypothesis. So in other words, we convict them. That is a correct decision. Okay. Moving down to the lower right one, that would be also a correct decision. So the null hypothesis is true, the defendant is really innocent, and then we let them go free. Okay, they are innocent and they get to go on. Those are the right decisions, but there are two wrong decisions that could be made. Starting with the type 1 error, this would be where the null hypothesis is true, okay, but we decide it's no longer true. So this would be kind of the equivalent of the innocent person is convicted. So we send somebody to jail or to death row, even worse, erroneously. Okay, that would be what a type 1 error is. A type 2 error would be the other direction. This would be where we have a guilty person who goes free. Okay, so the most famous one of that is like O.J. Simpson, of course. After he was found to be not guilty, he admitted that he did indeed kill his wife. So those, again, are two types of errors that could be made. Now, I don't want you to spend a whole ton of time trying to analyze which is which, even in an in-class, in-person experience. These are the types of errors. I write them out, give you the chart, and then ask you to tell which is which, okay? But I just want to give you some guidelines, again, and a little bit of a symbol in particular that we're going to be using, okay? So the probability of making a type 1 error is the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis when it's true. Okay, so you decide that something is different when it's really not changed. That symbol is alpha, okay, a little fish there. And that is what is known as the significance level. And we are going to be using that term significance level and the symbol alpha for the rest of chapter 7 and chapter 8. And then just another kind of basic idea here. As the type 1 error increases, so as you are willing to allow the chance that an innocent person is convicted, the type 2 error, the likelihood that that guilty person goes free, that probability, turn my pen back on, that probability decreases. Okay, so as one goes up, the other goes down. I'm going to let you read through that next little section. That would be if you set up your own research project, something that I've done in the past with students, but we're not going to do in the circumstances that we're under right now. Okay, but definitely if you ever have to take another stats class or do some statistical research, that would be handy. So real quick, let's just walk through some of these examples. This will help us, again, just a little practice setting up a null and alternative hypothesis and talking about what errors mean. I'm going to go relatively quick on this because, again, this isn't something that even when I am face-to-face with you, that I make you memorize, I let you walk through these. Okay, so we need the null and alternative hypothesis for this first example here. So it says 16% of children are overweight. So our null hypothesis, H sub 0, again, colon, is that the percentage or the proportion, so P equals 0.016. And the school nurse thinks the percentage in her district is higher. So the school nurse's alternative hypothesis is that the percentage or the proportion is greater than 0.16. If you do want to write that as 16%, by the way, that is perfectly acceptable not to put that in decimal form. So what would it mean to make a type 1 error? So that would mean the null hypothesis is true. So 16% of the children in the district really are overweight, and she decides that it's more. Okay, so that's what that would mean. So it means 16% of kids in the district are overweight. Okay, but we conclude or we decide the percentage is higher. All right, so what would a type 2 error look like in this particular study? So again, a type 2 error would be that the null hypothesis is false, okay? So we decide, the null hypothesis is false, and we decide that we're not going to reject it. We're going to accept that it's really 16%, even though it's not, okay? So that would mean, we decide the percentage is 16% when it's actually greater than 16%. Okay, and then these conclusions, these are the things that will be definitely coming up in the rest of chapter 7 and chapter 8. So these conclusions are two that we need to definitely spend a little time focusing on. I'm even going to highlight them a little bit to let you know that those are important for sure. Okay, so state the conclusion if the null hypothesis is rejected. So the way that this is phrased is we would say that we have enough evidence to show that more than 16% of kids in the district are overweight. Okay, so we have enough evidence to show that we are not keeping the null hypothesis, that we are going with the alternative, and the alternative was more than 16% are overweight. Okay, if we do not reject it, then what we say is we do not have enough evidence to support the claim or to show that more than 16% of kids in the district are overweight. Okay, it doesn't mean that there couldn't be evidence found later. It just means that right now we don't have enough evidence. You could collect more, you can do more data searching or whatever, but it doesn't mean that we just say that no, we're wrong. We just say we don't have enough evidence. Same thing in a trial, right? There's times that you still may think that person's guilty, but the lawyers just didn't bring enough to the table to really be able to convince you of that. Okay. As for what level of significance would you use, again, we're going to skip over that part for this portion of the class just based on where things are. Okay, so I'm going to have you pause real quick for example 4. Write out the null alternative hypotheses for A, and then also come up with what it means to make a type 1 and type 2 error. You can skip over D and then start the video again and see how you did. All right, so go ahead and take a second to see how you did. Particular emphasis, please, on making sure that your notation up here in this portion for the null and alternative hypotheses are correct, okay? That's one of the biggest errors that students make. So just make sure your notation's right. And then again, there's what it means to make a type 1 and a type 2 error in those studies. And again, all you really need to be able to do is look at that chart and make sure you can come up with the correct interpretation of a type 1 and a type 2 error. All right, next we will be on to section 7.2, where we will actually start looking at one sample tests. So we'll actually run some hypothesis tests and see how this starts to work in real life.